welcome all to today's online panel discussion on de-risking MedTech product development. So to kick us off, I would like to give you a small introduction on Amplify MedTech, who we are and what we do. So I am the founder of Amplify MedTech. I've been in the MedTech space for 20 years. I worked with hundreds of startups, helped them build and scale their products. And I launched Amplify MedTech last year because I saw a gap in the ecosystem to provide targeted MedTech services, education, programming, and even connections so that MedTech entrepreneurs can meet each other and have valuable connections that they need to build and grow their startups. So our mission is to establish a collaborative MedTech ecosystem by promoting networking, sharing of resources, and bringing the entire ecosystem together so that we have a vibrant, sustainable, and locally engaged MedTech community in the region. In the last 10 months, we have provided educational programming like the one that you are in right now. We have conducted workshops, and we have also brought the community together through networking events. We serve everybody in the MedTech ecosystem because we believe that it's important for all players to come together in order for everyone to be successful. We create impact by hosting events, by creating collaborations. We have multiple partnerships in place. We facilitate access to resources. We help you make the connections that you need to make. And basically, we want people to thrive in the ecosystems that they are in so that we can create sustainable, vibrant ecosystems wherever people are based. Our next event is on November 12th, which will be our anniversary celebration. This is a very exciting milestone for us. We'll be completing a year. It's been a very, very interesting year, and we are very excited to share our celebration with you and share what we have accomplished in the year during this year. If you would like to keep in touch with what we are doing, please follow Amplify MedTech on LinkedIn so that you can keep updated with everything that we are working on. So with that, I would like to welcome today's esteemed speakers. We have Lauren Eskew and Steve Schaefer. I would like to turn it over to you so that you can introduce yourselves. So Lauren, why don't you start?
Okay, yeah, my name's Lauren. I have been in MedTech my whole career. I spent the first decade as an engineer doing product development. Worked in a bunch of different sort of market verticals within MedTech, like urology, women's health, cardiovascular, critical care. So definitely have a lot of experience on the technical side doing engineering and product development. But I guess 3.5, 4 years ago, I switched over and did a little career change, and now I'm in business development and strategy for an engineering company that focuses on MedTech product development. So we have I work for KeyTech. We are an engineering firm that, has like 60 technical folks here of all the different disciplines doing product development in that MedTech space.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thanks.
We're very excited to have you on board. And Steve, can you please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about what are you working on?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Steve Schaefer. I am the CEO of CoolTech and of MyHelper Inc. And I started my career as a CPA and got excited about what one of my clients was doing, jumped off, helped them build a MedTech global enterprise, and we sold that to General Medical. So that was my first step into entrepreneurship, and I've had 7 successful exits since then. focused mostly in life science, concentrating on MedTech and oncology and pulmonology, GI, etc., but also in general tech and health data science. So been able to see the healthcare industry from many perspectives, including as a consumer. I'm excited to bring innovations to the marketplace, take it from concept to actually doing something to help people. That's what I'm passionate about. So I appreciate Amplify MedTech for inviting me to talk with the group.
Thank you and welcome, Steve. And I think, can you also tell us what you're currently working on? What's your current startup working on?
What, with this thing right here, my helper?
Oh, yeah, that
Yeah,
little
it
thing.
just so happens to be by my side, and soon it'll be available worldwide. We have the first ever thermal neuromodulation device for pain and mood disorders. Our initial indication is for migraine. We've had 4 clinical studies with great outcomes so far. We've worked with our development partner, Tech, to create the actual device that is designed for home use, because we found that people lack access to the care they need with migraine. It's an incredibly disabling disease, high cost burden, and it's just dreadful to have. So we wanted to be able to provide something that met people where they are, provide them, very rapid relief that could be self-administered without having to go in and see a doctor. So we work with Tech to develop this My Helper platform, which I have right here. And so we're able to test it in people's homes, the comfort of their homes. And we've seen incredibly good results. And we have a pivotal study that will unblind in about a month from now. So we're excited, get our de novo application and get it to market, and bring this much needed relief to the billion people worldwide that suffer from migraine.
Well, yeah, very important technology. I know when I was a kid, I suffered from migraine too. I was lucky that I got out of it once I hit puberty. I've heard that for a lot of people, it actually gets worse after puberty. In my case, it ended at puberty. So I'm very lucky that I only had to suffer through it for the first few years of my life. But I remember the pain and how debilitating it was.
It's very much a women's health issue. 80% of the people with migraine are women. From puberty to menopause is the primary portion of their life. So it's a tough time to have something that puts you out of commission.
Right, absolutely. So, Steve, since you're a serial entrepreneur, you worked with so many different startups, you've taken startups to exit. If we are talking about a startup that is very early stage, they're probably at their proof of concept, they have an idea, maybe they have validated it, they have some product market fit. Um, Based on your experience, what are the biggest risks that early founders underestimate at this stage?
Well, I'd say one of them is that the product market fit that they think they have is illusory, because it's almost impossible to know, before you even have it, what people will do with it. I mean, marginal improvements and things just don't change people's behavior. There's so much inertia. So early on, you have to be self-critical of what it really takes to have that winning value proposition. So I think that's a mistake. I even forgot your question already, but I think
Well,
that's often a mistake people make.
right. Yeah, you're very right. And our last month's session was exclusively focused on product market fit. And we
Mm.
went through all the steps of what it requires to really establish a good product market fit. And you're absolutely right. I think people settle on the product market fit too early, or they create a product market fit that is so wide that it doesn't make sense from either a go to market perspective or even from a clinical trial studies perspective, right? So that that piece is an ongoing thing. And I know companies that have developed their alpha prototype and are, might have to pivot on their product market fit even at that point. Lauren, what about you? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think product market fit is definitely a big one. I think, you know, a lot of a lot of risk that we see at KeyTech, and this might go into that next question that you're going to ask me, but I'll just go ahead and answer it. I think that when we're trying to balance like innovating something new, but also making something that adheres to FDA requirements, it is a balance, and it's managing those risks and understanding what can be flexible and when it can be flexible. I think it's something that KeyTech does really well is like, because we have a lot of experience developing a variety of medical devices, even though we're having these very early innovative sort of discovery periods, we always have that in the background that, we need to make this so that it can go through FDA and it, is adherent to biocompatibility, electrical safety, usability, all of that. I think something that we do here that I think it's beneficial is early in development when we're doing sort of concept feasibility pre-design controls. Um, we, especially when it's a medical device that's like software based, there's 62304 is a standard that you have to adhere to for software, and it's a process. It's a standard that's based on a process and how you do that coding. And at KeyTech, to not be bogged down by the regulatory, but to still reduce risk, we do this thing called designing in the spirit of 62304, where we've had so much experience developing software-based medical devices. We know what they're looking for to adhere to that standard. So we're going to make it so that when we're doing that early development, it's going to be an easier transition to rev into formal development. So just things like that sort of come with experience is knowing what sort of big pitfalls there are when you're going from that very innovative early, like, crude prototyping into like an actual medical device, and understanding like, okay, we're proving concept right now and that's important, but what things can we do to make it less risky when we transition?
Right, absolutely. The process of thinking when your research is in the lab or it is in the ideation phase, the products that you're developing are very crude, very early stage. And when you start designing, it's important to start thinking of the end, design with the end in mind, right? Rather than just how to accomplish the next milestone. So with that, Lauren, I would like to follow up. If in this early stages, then in this design and prototyping stage, how would a startup think about de-risking complex subsystems of their device, like optics or microfluidics or mechanics, because in their earlier stage, they probably may not have funding to do, very extensive design work at this point. How do you work with them at this stage on de-risking some of these components?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it's very dependent project to project, but really it comes down to, fully understanding the goal of the system that we're developing and breaking it into subsystems and identifying which subsystems sort of have the highest risk. And that risk can be anything. It can be reliability, it can be like avoiding, so KeyTech does a lot of work in vitro diagnostics. So think, you have an instrument and then you have a disposable or a cartridge that runs a patient sample through various different steps, and then you get a readout. Does the patient have this condition or not? And, we're oftentimes taking that from, a very manual process where a user is pipetting and moving sample along to a very automated process where the machine is now taking that sample and moving it through that same assay workflow. And inherently that has a lot of risk, right? We're now needing to have sample pushed through a filter or mixed with dried reagents. And you want to understand the implications of those designs before you just try to put it all into one full thing and run it, because then everything's just going to go wrong and you're going to have to take 1,000 steps back. So what Keytex does is we'll look at something and we'll say, okay, our biggest risk areas are, this filter and then this mixing step. So we're going to make a small little coupon and a test fixture where we can look at a bunch of different filters, and maybe we have sensors on there to read out pressure. And we're going to make sure we pick the right filter and test that over and over again and make sure that there's no crazy pressure spikes that could cause the cartridge to fail, and really burn down that risk on a subsystem or subcomponent level where it's needed, right? We're not going to do that for the whole thing. That would take forever. But those higher risk items, will identify that, build certain little test fixtures to build up confidence in that subsystem before we integrate it into the full device. So I think it's really based on your technology and having sort of the right partner or right team internally to help identify which areas might be higher risk, and then how do we break it apart and build confidence before putting it all together. And we're talking technical, but usability is another big one. So oftentimes our industrial design team will quickly create a foam core model of what this device would look like and how it would sit in the OR, so that we can figure out any usability challenges that might be early on before like your mechanical layout is fixed and you're in formal development. So really you need to look at it from a high level, what are these higher risk items, and then break it down and work through those, build confidence before you put it back together.
Right. And you bring up such an important point, Lauren. Just the other day, I was speaking with a very early stage startup that is developing a method for biopsy that ensures better results, right? And my biggest question to them was, how are you thinking about the product development in a way that it's not going that that's not going to be painful for the patient, right? Biopsies are very painful to begin with. And so, depending on what product you are developing, like you can't test a crude prototype or on a patient where you're doing a biopsy, because that could cause additional trauma. And so, factoring those things in and creating it based on the product, I think, is very important. Um, Steve, my helper now is in, I'm assuming this is the final product that will go to market, right, from a design perspective. But when you first started working on my helper, how did you approach product development? How did you ensure that you were staying lean, you were getting things done, but making sure that, the design specifications were aligning towards FDA approval and scale?
Sure. Great question. Well, we did a lot of iteration working with Keytech, and we did a lot of road mapping of where, as you said, it ends where it begins. You have to design with the end in mind. But there's a lot of gates that you need to go through to de-risk your product, to gather the essential clinical data, first to prove to yourself that it works, and then as evidence for adoption and eventually even insurance reimbursement. So what we had to envision first was, what do we need to gather the clinical data? And there's some things that we needed that were additional to what a commercial product might require, such as a blinding mode, insurance of it only being used one time if it was a single-use study, prohibiting technologically a repeat use. And there were other things that, from a longer term perspective, for repeat use and the equivalent of permanent contact for biocompatibility, we didn't want to mess with. We didn't want to bring that problem forward. We wanted to plan for it in the roadmap, but we didn't want to bring it forward. We didn't want to deal with the cost. We didn't want to design in the feature set, and we didn't want to do the testing. So we were very intentional about the design that was a study design, and being able to deploy that in an initial pilot clinical study, and then moving it to a pivotal study that we're finishing up now. And that's gone very well. And it's really reduced our costs, but it's allowed us to hit these milestones where we can raise capital incrementally at better prices as we go along. And in most cases, it's, can you raise the capital at all? You know, what's compelling about what you're doing? Why should someone come in before you have your clearance and before you have revenues, and it's just a financial engineering scale play? You know, anybody can invest there, but few are in these days. So you have to be cognizant of the fact that it could be the survival of your enterprise, how wisely you choose your development plan, and how it fits your stage of growth as you go along. So for my helper, you know, when we had some feature sets designed in that we weren't activated in the clinical trial that will be for the commercial, but that was the low hanging fruit. And then there were some things that we intentionally did not design in, and we stayed away from, for example, we have Bluetooth capability, but it's completely disabled for our commercial product because we don't want to be a cyber device. You know, we don't have the budget for that, and it's really not necessary. People want to press a button and make their migraine go away. They don't need, you know, Star Wars going on in the background with their smartphone. Sounds cool, but introduced a lot of costs and risks that we didn't want. So we have the Bluetooth. We use it for manufacturing and for checkout, and we use it for study purposes. Like, we can download what happens during the session. We know what people tell us, but now we can, you know, quickly interface with the device and pull that data to corroborate our patient-reported outcomes and have really rigorous clinical data that everybody's going to be excited about. So anyway, I could go on and on, but I do want to come back later to one of the tool sets that KeyTech has. It's proprietary, called Key Sharp, that we use, which helped us even in figuring out, you know, do we want this feature or not? How does this feel? How does this look? Like, what's it? I mean, we can talk about it, but I can use it and I can tweak it and I can change another variable and I get instant response. And then, you know, that the tool is really wonderful, and we haven't found it anywhere else.
Wonderful. So you touched on so many very important points, right? Like the engineering gold plating thing, which I think a lot of inventors would suffer from, because yeah, they are engineers, they are scientists, right? They want to see how to make it better, how to make it better. But when you're in the product development phase, you want to make sure that it's not just about creating the next cool product. It's about creating that which your customer will actually use, because the more features you have in there, the costlier your product becomes. And then that could impact your go to market. And using tools early on, like the eSharp at KeyTech, to determine what features are actually necessary and what are not. So, Lauren, following up on that, what testable metrics do you employ at early stage to help people make decisions around this is good enough right now?
Yeah, I think, I mean, a bunch of different things. I think the key is having quantitative, like, real pass-fail criteria. Because I think a lot of times we'll put, you know, qualitative things like the device works reliably. But, like, what does that mean? Is it, you know, the fluid's able to move from point A to point B without forming bubbles, or it's able to go through 100 cycles and not have a failure? So, like, putting actual numbers behind that sort of pass-fail criteria that you're setting at each major milestone for each subsystem or for your full device. I think Steve talked about it a little bit, but I think my helper did a really good job about sort of strategically thinking through what does an MVP look like at every stage of development, and it's going to be different. And what key things do you want to evaluate right now, and versus for a fully like suited out, gold plated, beautiful product, and like looking at what you're looking to evaluate and then designing the next phase of this product to look like that, so you can evaluate it and be efficient with what you're spending. I think that's really key, and part of that is defining these pass fail criteria so that when you hit that current MVP, you're able to say we passed, and if we failed, let's redesign some stuff and retest so that we can pass and move on with confidence.
Right. Yeah, and taking a stepwise approach with the long term in mind.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So a really good combination of long term and short term thinking to make sure you're being efficient, but keeping the long term in mind. Steve, at what point should startups start thinking about integrating regulatory into their product roadmap? And how should they do it, right? What is the best way to do it? Like, I hear people say, oh, you should be thinking about regulatory right up front, which is very true. But how do you think about regulatory when you are in the early stage of concept and feasibility versus when you are, further along in your development? How did you approach it?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. I think that in the very early stages, when you're in discovery, when you're conceptualizing the invention, when you're trying to find a solution for a problem that you know a lot about, uh, you don't need to be thinking about regulatory at that point in time. In fact, you shouldn't, because it constrains your thinking, and it creates bias that'll lead you one place where maybe you shouldn't go, right? You need to be audacious in your thought process at that point in time. Um, Blue sky. However, when you start taking people's money and you decided what you think is going to work, and you start actualizing it, that's the time where regulatory needs to come in, and no later than that. I mean, even the broad lanes of like what type of product will this be? Is it a class 2 device? Could it be over the counter? Are we going to have to go through a PMA? You want to be honest about that and factor that into your long-term planning to make sure it's feasible. Like, for what I'm doing, is someone going to let me go through a PMA process that's going to take $100 million in 7 years? Because it will. The answer could be no. No chance, right? So bring that realization forward. So it's just the pathway is important, but then you got to get down into, okay, what are the major obstructions within that pathway? And then that's going to burden my program with a need for more resource and more time. And does my business model withstand that? Is it that good of an idea that that's okay? And that's more like pass fail thinking. Obviously, when you get down to doing the actual design requirements, regulatory should be thought of as you go along. It doesn't have to like stop you, but it should inform you as to what the implications might be for doing one thing versus another.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Should not stop you. It should inform you. I think those are the golden words that, companies have to keep in mind. Uh, be very realistic about how you're moving forward and keep that pathway in mind. And So for companies, and my helper is at that stage now where you're getting very close to submitting all your documentation to the FDA. Lauren, what are the common technical gaps that you see in designs that are headed towards FDA submission? What have they missed early on that they catch when they're getting ready to go towards FDA submission? And how can they address that?
Yeah, I think, I see a lot from my seat. I get to talk to a lot of companies that are early in development, but also ones that are, that are pretty close to FDA submission. Maybe they have one rev of their product that they want to do, and then they think they're ready to go. And I think, I see a lot of different things. I think one thing is like insufficient risk documentation. So like not fully filling out those FMEAs, or maybe not fully understanding like the hazards of potential failure modes, or underestimating those hazards, and that coming back to bite them. I think, usability is also a big one. A lot of people push that off. And then, things are sort of locked and you can't do a big change if users are, doing something wrong pretty consistently in your formative or your summative study. That's like a big issue. So I think getting it in front of users earlier and then really prioritizing usability. Another thing that sort of comes to mind, and I mentioned it earlier, is that 62304 standard. I think a lot of people, assume they have a fully functioning, looks like, feels like prototype, and they're like, okay, we can just rev it into design controls and then we'll be ready to submit. And in certain situations, like a mechanical system that's purely mechanical, like revving it into a design control environment isn't a huge hurdle. But when you're talking about software, and say that software is doing something that's safety critical, so it'd be like a Class C software, we're going to have to start that code over from scratch, which is going to take a lot of time and effort and money, to bring that to something that is FDA ready. And that's something that if you have, a good team, they won't let you get that far without considering that standard. But, I think sometimes it is overlooked. And then, there's that assumption that, we'll just be able to quickly put it into design controls and submit. But that's not the case for software, which makes it a little bit more complicated.
Right. Yeah. And it's such an important point, especially now. We have so much software integrated into MedTech, but also with AI becoming more and more predominant in MedTech, especially like I don't know, Steve, if you're thinking about, you may not have integrated it, but there is a lot of data being collected by a lot of MedTech devices um, at the back end. And so AI becomes a part of it. And how do you think about regulatory when you're thinking about using that data to, make improvements down the line for that device or using that data to have better outcomes?
Yeah, so we really don't fall under that because we're triggering a physiological response that is a subjective, non-measurable by anything other than how someone feels and what they'll tell you. Pain is very complex, and there's no widget to tell you you're at a 7. So for us, it's probably not something currently. In the future, we think about treatment optimizations and personalizing the therapy. So we provide a range of user controls, but just psychologically is helpful for additional placebo effect. But in terms of hitting the right level of cooling to inhibit the nerve pathway to shut off the symptoms, which is what we're doing. We're drawing energy out of the body through the energy required for the the liquid in your mucosa to turn to vapor and just go out your other nostril. So that's our mechanism by which we're modulating that nerve pathway. It's very simple and elegant, but some people are big, some people are small, some people have higher levels of blood flow. Some people, there's just a lot of differences in people, and so one device, the therapy that it can deliver, you want to be able to tailor it, and so there may be some cause and effect between circumstances of someone's migraine attack and what's most effective for them for that circumstance, that we would want AI to both look at the device, how did it really operate, take their user reported outcomes, marry them together, and kind of come up with an optimal treatment algorithm for them in the future. So I can see it down the line, but it's not something that we're really dealing with right now. We're like
Lauren,
intentionally, yeah, like one more thing I'd say is that, we're intentionally keeping our de novo process clean and simple. And we have things that we want to deploy, but we've intentionally pulled them off for going through de novo when it's going to get intense scrutiny. And then we'll just do a 510K with our own device as a predicate to iterate and add back in certain functions. So we wouldn't dare touch anything with AI, even cyber right now, but we will in the future. And once we have a big commercial footprint, it'll make it that much easier.
right. And that strategy of regulatory, how do you approach regulatory approval so that you get to it fast is so important. I know of companies that do have AI built in, and they will do two different regulatory submissions, one for the hardware and one for the AI, so as to not complicate things or to make the regulatory process really onerous. Lauren, what have you seen in your experience with companies that are integrating AI into their product?
Yeah, I think it's similar where, let's get the device out there and start collecting data and then use that to optimize the AI model and figure it all out from there. It's definitely like a stepwise approach.
Right. Okay, wonderful. So let's shift a little bit towards scale now. Steve, what factors should a company take into consideration once they have received FDA approval and are now going towards scale? What are the things that they have to take into consideration to make sure that they don't face supply chain or manufacturing issues?
Yeah. So first, you want to be with if you're not making it yourself, and I think it rarely makes sense to make it yourself, although sometimes it does. But for most things, you're going to be with a contract manufacturer that has the scale and the wherewithal to produce whatever you need in terms of quantities of product, and deal with the fulfillment. But let's see. I think that cost takeout is something that's important to blueprint and do for the future. And it's not something that you really need to have immediately, but you need to know how you're going to get there, both with like economic order quantities and also with just design changes to make it more manufacturable, to reduce component risk, potentially, replace components with more readily available, even potentially locally sourced, as a backup available. But once you're commercial, the other thing I believe strongly in is following your product and doing so in a scientific way. Like open label registries, I think are very effective, and I think it's something the FDA wants to see more and more of. And even volunteering, hey, when we put this product on the market, we're going to have a specific indication, but we're also going to see how it's used. We're going to make sure it's used safely. We're going to adapt our IFU if we have to. And if we find promising new uses, we're going to study them and we're going to expand our label from that. Because, you come up with one idea of what it's going to be used for, but people use it for other things, and it could either be dangerous, so you want to put the brakes on that because you're responsible, or it could be promising and you want to follow that. So I really think that the open label registry studies are important once you launch a product.
Yeah, having the transparency right now upfront to make sure that you're making that information available. Um, Lauren, how do you ensure that when a company is going from making 10 to 25 pieces to transitioning to manufacturing at scale, that the design specifications that were put in place still hold for that scale?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure a lot of people on this call have heard of DFX, but design for manufacturability, design for assembly, design for environment, design for everything. I think Key Tech has a very structured design review process with checklists and everything that we walk through at every major milestone that are catered to each milestone to make sure that we're considering those things at the right time. Um, I think, actually the My Helper device is like a really good case study for this. Steve is like a dream client where we were able to, he understood the importance of DFX, and it wasn't much pushback on, can we design this for easy assembly, easy checkout, everything that is important for that transition to larger scale manufacturing. And we did so. We were able to do that. And, we transferred to a manufacturer who then came back and said, this was the best pilot build we've ever had, like very minimal, if none at all, rework needed. He was very happy with that transition. And it was one of those great case studies where we could actually see the value of that DFX investment. Because it's always sort of like a balance, a lot of people don't want to spend that money too early or that attention to the DFX too early. But it's important. And it makes it so much, I think in the bigger picture, it's going to save you time and money to do it before we do that transition and all these issues pop up.
Yeah. So at what point should they think about DFX in their product design?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on the complexity of the device and everything, but once you start getting into that formal development and you're doing fully integrated prototypes, you should start thinking about it. I think it needs to be able to come together in a way that is easy to assemble, or else your labor rates are going to be through the roof. And like at some point, you're going to have to do a full redesign to accommodate that. So it's things that, once you're starting to put everything together, it needs to be something you've considered. And I'm not saying you need to fully design it in that first fully integrated prototype, but you need to be thinking about it and have a clear path to getting there by the scale up. So yeah, we start thinking about it once we're doing fully integrated prototypes.
Right, absolutely. Because if you don't make that investment early, the cost of it down the line is much higher.
Yeah.
Yeah. So to this has been such a great discussion. Steve, I would like to ask you as a startup, from an investor's perspective, what technical milestones will convince the investor that you have truly thought about de-risking your product development? What should startups keep in mind as they think about not just developing their product, but also making sure that they're fundraising to support that product development? What do investors want to see that will convince them to make that investment?
Sure. Well, the most important is data, and either if it's a diagnostic, the accuracy, specificity, etc. If it's a therapeutic, what do the outcomes look like, and does that justify your program? And that's the number one thing. So you'll start off with a pilot feasibility, or then a pilot, and then you'll move into early efficacy, and then you get to the point of definitive efficacy. And they all want more than you have. They're always looking around the next corner. But that is the number one thing, that you have a pathway. If it's something that costs $5 million to make one of, and it has, a good benefit to it, but $5 million, like, so you have to have a cost benefit equation that will make sense. And it might not make sense on day one, but you have to have a pathway towards a business model that provides the kind of margins that people will get excited about if they make this further investments in. So the more validation you have, like being able to get it in front of the people who will be your customers and be willing to hear what you don't want to hear, let them pick it apart, let them critique it, tell you why it won't work, why they won't use it, why something else is better, or even if it's not better, why they're not going to change from it. Yeah, I mean, you just have to get into their world, be able to bring that voice of the customer then to your investor. To establish a scientific advisory board early, I think is important, because if you have trouble putting a panel together, guess what? You probably don't have anything that's very interesting. If they're not willing to invest their time and effort and put their name behind it, and then that's going to tell you something. So that's almost the first thing I do. Even like, will I come in and run a company? Well, let me talk to the key opinion leaders, and then I'll tell you. And then you get them on board, and they inform your clinical program or maybe your engineering requirements as you go forward. You have them along with you the whole time, and then you engage your investors with them. I think it's important to be able. That's a big de-risking point, is to have them behind it, and yeah, I think that's in any kind of external validation. If you can get an NIH grant, or you can get someone externally bought into it, your clinical trial partners, including your PIs and your sites, like how excited are they? How committed are they? Are they doing it just to make money? Or are they willing to come in with kind of an aggressive offer to run studies at their centers? So they're all things they look at. And of course, I mean, I don't want to get too far into non-engineering things, but it's really, the IP is important, right? Right. You're making it. Do you have the freedom to use it? Is it defensible? How are you going to defend it? Are you just relying on a method? Good luck. Do you have some hardcore apparatus patents that you can, directly use to enforce them in the future? IP matters. It's true. IP matters. It really does.
Yeah, very true. Like, I think a lot of investors look at, especially the market validation, right? Even at the early stages, making sure that you have customer interest in what you're developing and that this has a path forward. It's not just a wonderful hobby that you're working on. Whereas to me, I always say that if you don't have a market, what you have is a hobby.
Mhm.
And so with that, I would like to, I could keep talking to these two. They're, so knowledgeable. But I did want to open it up for questions. If you guys have any specific questions, you can either drop them in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and ask the question.
Hello. I'm Michael. I'm UMD student. And I was just wondering, so when in your progression of your current migraine device, did you end up contacting Keytech, and how did you progress before contacting Keytech?
That's a great question. So we were already partnered with them, working on a temperature management device called CoolStat, which is an amazing product. And we came up with a different use case for it in a whole different field of use, being pain and mood disorders versus temperature management. And so they were with us from day one. There was a Johns Hopkins based study with a prototype for proof of concept, but after that we said, okay, well, we want to see if this works. So how do we take our temperature management device, modify it to be open loop for the purpose of this migraine delivery? How do we test different flow rates? How do we accomplish the same thing with our current platform, knowing we can't bring that platform into people's homes in the future? It was different, but we could certainly run a clinical study. So we ran clinical studies working with Key Tech with the modified PoolStat, just sitting behind me right back there. So we did studies there at Hopkins, and then we transitioned to MyHelper for home use. And every single step of the way, they were with us. So while we were running the in-clinic studies with the modified PoolStat, they were developing the MyHelper device for where we wanted it to be in the at-home study. And we actually made 120 of those devices. And as Lauren said, they worked really well. We sent them to people's homes. They treated themselves. They sent it back. We reworked them. We sent them back out. We had 172 people in that study. We did another study. We redeployed them. They work flawlessly. And, some have been out there 5 times with the very first incarnation of the product. And yeah, we had bugs when it first went out, as we knew we would, but we quickly remediated them, implemented that, and saw immediate benefit of that. And a lot had to do also with the software approach that they took, that we could implement changes really on the fly, that everything was automated, the checkout was automated. We could run through all the systems, check out everything with diagnostics. And if necessary, we could, tune the algorithm that delivered the therapy, so that if there's an idiosyncrasy between one box and another, one component, just some small thing, that we still got the same output to the patient. So every single device was tuned using that tool, and it only took a matter of seconds to make it happen on each one.
Oh, I had one question, like a follow-up, if nobody was going to ask one. Ms. Eskew, you talked about like how you need to have like quantitative goals rather than qualitative goals.
Yeah.
So how did you guys get sort of the more quantitative goals after receiving that information back from the participants?
So you're saying, like, when you say from the participants, you're saying like if you were doing like a user study or something, or?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, an example, if you're like looking at a user study, say there's a piece of your workflow where misuse could cause like a critical error. Instead of just being like, this device isn't misused, you could say 95% of users went through that step without critical error. And then you could look at, like, when you ran the study, okay, we were actually at like 80. And so let's make it a little bit more intuitive, a little bit more user friendly, so that they don't create that error when they use it. But just setting those like actual numbered thresholds where you can, sometimes you won't be able to. But wherever you can, putting actual numbers to things will just help you have like an objective path forward, and build more confidence at every stage of development. And honestly, it tells a good story to your potential investors and people that want to get on your board, like, too, look, we were able to, you have numbers to show them at, like, we're proving out at each step, we're proving these things. So it's just helpful when you have that.
All right. If there are no other questions, I would like to take this opportunity to thank both Lauren and Steve for joining us today. This was a very insightful discussion, and I hope it was helpful for you as well. Please stay in touch. Let us know how we can help you and support you as you are moving forward in your product development and your startup development.
Yeah.
Right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good day.